Hey there. So, I definitely did not mean for it to be a month between episodes of this podcast or video program or whatever it is. Um, uh, Hopefully, we'll get back on track here and get to kind of a more weekly thing. I don't know, we'll see. During the first one, I talked about how I really wanted to recommend a story from Dubliners by James Joyce, the story called The Dead, but I couldn't find a way into it. And I think probably part of what it was, I was trying to think of a way to describe it that would make you want to read it, which is sort of the goal of this program. Part of it was that I felt like I don't get it, and I was nervous about that. I was nervous about the fact, how can I recommend a story that I don't totally get myself? And then I realized people do that with movies all the time, with music all the time. It's okay to not get a book. I think we have to give ourselves permission to read something and not get it and still enjoy it. Realize we can still enjoy something that we don't totally get. The Dead is an amazing story. I don't think I get it on all of the levels that I could get it on. But I know that it's amazing, and I know that it's worth reading, and that's why I'm recommending it to you. And to give you a little background, it takes place around a party. The guy is looking at his wife towards the end of the story, thinking he knows her. It's something I think we've all anybody who's been in a relationship has that moment where they look at their significant other and think that they know them, and then later in the story she tells him a story that makes him reevaluate what he thinks he's known about his wife, their entire relationship, and it's just amazing, the epiphany that he has at the end, and that's what I'll read for you. She was fast asleep. Gabriel, leaning on his elbow, looked for a few minutes unresentfully on her tangled hair and half-open mouth, listening to her deep-drawn breath. So she had had that romance in her life. A man had died for her sake. It hardly pained him now to think how poor a part he, her husband, had played in her life. He watched her while she slept, as though he and she had never lived together as man and wife. His curious eyes rested long upon her face and on her hair, and as he thought of what she must have been then, in that time of her first girlish beauty, a strange, friendly pity for her entered his soul. He did not like to say, even to himself, that her face was no longer beautiful, but he knew that it was no longer the face for which Michael Fury had braved death. Perhaps she had not told him all of the story. His eyes moved to the chair over which she had thrown some of her clothes. A petticoat string dangled to the floor. One boot stood upright, its limp upper fallen down. The fellow of it lay upon its side. He wondered at his riot of emotions of an hour before. From what had it proceeded? From his aunt's supper? From his own foolish speech? From the wine and dancing, the merrymaking, when saying good night in the hall? The pleasure of the walk along the river in the snow. Poor Aunt Julia. She, too, would soon be a shade, with the shade of Patrick Morkan and his horse. He had caught that haggard look upon her face for a moment when she was singing Arrayed for the Bridal. Soon, perhaps, he would be sitting in that same drawing-room, dressed in black, his silk hat on his knees. The blinds would be drawn down, and Aunt Kate would be sitting beside him, crying and blowing her nose, and telling him how Julia had died. He would cast about in his mind for some words that might console her, and he would find only lame and useless ones. Yes, that would happen very soon. The air of the room chilled his shoulders. He stretched himself cautiously under the sheets and lay down beside his wife. One by one they were all becoming shades. Better pass boldly into that other world, in the full glory of some passion, then fade and wither dismally with age. He thought of how she who lay beside him had locked in her heart for so many years that image of her lover's eyes when he had told her that he did not wish to live. Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness he imagined he saw the form of a young man standing under a dripping tree. Other forms were near. His soul had approached that region where dwell the vast hosts of the dead. He was conscious of, but could not apprehend, their wayward and flickering existence. His own identity was fading out into a gray, impalpable world. The solid world itself, which these dead had one time reared and lived in, was dissolving and dwindling. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again. He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and further westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling, too, upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe, and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead. Well, I certainly didn't do a great job of reading it. And there's something to be said for reading it again and for striving for more of a sense of professionalism with my little podcast here, or video program, whatever you want to call it. But I'm tired, and it took a lot to just get this together, so I'm going to end it there. I hope you will read The Dead by James Joyce. You can find it online. You can find it in Dubliners, the collection it's from. You've got to read this. Any number of anthologies. It's widely anthologized. It's a great story. And that's what you got to read this time. See you next time.